The ostriches are saved for another day. The story out in BC is something to behold. Because it's happening on a farm out in BC, out in the West, it has tended to be fairly quiet. However, it has taken the power of social media to really bring it to national attention and help people realize what has been currently happening. And well, we will be getting into that whole story today and why it's important on a federal and national discussion and level. And as well as the Liberals in Nova Scotia have put forward an official bill to limit social media access to minors and actually denying them access to these services if they are under the age of 16. And we will be looking into what that bill is all about and how that links to the Bill C-63 that was introduced at the federal level by the federal Liberals and where this country goes if they decide to go down that path. This and so much more. We're going to get into all that in a little bit, but welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us to grow, helps us to get to new audiences, and helps people see that there's something different than what the mainstream media has to offer. Now, let's get into our first story, shall we? So, the ostrich farm in BC. This has been a very fascinating story, and a story that's been going on for the past, we've been watching for close to a year now at this point, and we are at kind of the height of the tension today. And why is this important? Well, because federal bureaucracy and federal institutions have been overreaching with their authority on the specific issue. There was approximately somewhere in the vicinity of close to 500 ostriches in BC. 69 of them had passed away due to the avian flu. So naturally, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency decided to get involved because, well, this is important. This is a farm where flu is breaking out amongst the herd and they need to figure out what's going on. So they ended up putting forward a call order. And a call order meaning we need to kill the rest of these ostriches so that the flu doesn't continue to spread. However, what ended up happening, which was fairly interesting, is that the ostriches ended up recovering and there were no more deaths taking place. But guess what? That did not matter to the CFIA. That did not matter to them at all. They said, well, we don't care. We already put the order forward, so we are going to kill them anyways. And that was what was taking place and why there's been such a fight back and forth over the past year over this, because there has not been clarity of what's been happening. These ostriches were able to overcome the flu, and quite frankly, it could lead to some great scientific innovation to find out what exactly happened here. However, the CFIA is like, yeah, that sounds logical, but we don't care. We need to take these guys out and we are going to carry out the order whether you like it or not. So I'm going to give you kind of a brief rundown of the timeline that has taken place up to this point and what led to the tension that's taken place over the past couple of days here out in BC. December 2024, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency was alerted after some ostriches began dying at Universal Ostrich Farm in Edgewood, BC. Samples collected from 2 birds tested positive for H5N1 avian influenza. In 2025, deaths to the flock had taken place. The farm reports that 69 ostriches died over the period of 36 days, which they said is about 15% of their flock. After testing and diagnosis, based on the positive tests and risk of further spread, the CFIA ordered a full cull to birds to prevent further disease, protect public and animal health, and guard the poultry industry. Between January 4th and 9th, the farm submits documents to the CFIA to apply for an exemption. They say the ostriches have rare and valuable genetics worthy of preservation. Ostrich deaths continue. January 10th, the CFIA denies the exemption. It says the farm has not submitted sufficient evidence to support its claims of genetic rarity and value. And on the 15th of January, the farm says the last ostrich death occurs, bringing the total to 69 birds with about 400 remaining. Late January and January 31st, the federal court issues a stay of call order while it considers an application by the farm for judicial review. Then we skip to May 13th. May 13th, the farm loses its application for judicial review, with the judge ruling the CFIA's decisions were reasonable based on the information it had at the time and were made in procedurally fair manner. May 16th to 18th, hundreds of supporters converge on the farm for the Ostrich Fest, a music concert and protest against the call order. And this is where things got very interesting because news started spreading about this in general, to the point where RFK Jr. for the United States offered to move the birds down to Florida at Dr. Oz's farm to protect them, put them in quarantine, and study out what these birds were all about. The problem is, when it comes to the World Health Animal Organization, which is a thing, WHO is what they're called. If a country deems a group of birds to have disease or a group of animals to have disease, it's against international law to move them across borders or move them anywhere for that matter. So Oz was willing to put the money up to move these birds down to Florida to protect them from being culled in Canada, and they were not allowed to do that. So as you see, the more of this tension is taking place over time. June 20th, the Federal Court of Appeal grants a second stay of the cull order pending an appeal. And July 11th to 13th, the farm hosts another concert featuring performers that include Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Litch. On July 15th, Kennedy writes to Canada's Minister of Agriculture, Health, Heath MacDonald, asking the cull be delayed so that ostriches can be researched. On the 21st, they said they're going to pull the May 13th ruling. September 6th, the farm is granted an interim stay by the Federal Court of Appeal, delaying the execution of the birds yet again. The 12th comes around. The Federal Court of Appeal judge says the cull must be allowed to proceed, denying a request from the farm for another stay while it applies to be heard by the Supreme Court of Canada in the application that it must take place by October 3rd. Judge Gerald Hickman says the farm has not established that its final proposed appeal raises a serious or arguable issue. September 13th, Sydney says the farm will still intends to apply to Canada's highest court. A spokeswoman for the CFIA says it has received requests from Universal Ostrich Farms to reconsider the original disposal order. And yet, the 22nd, 2 days ago, RCMP showed up at CFIA to carry out the full cull. So I appreciate you sticking out with me in terms of the whole timeline of how this has turned out. Every step of the way, we saw earlier this year that the ostriches had stopped dying. The spread had ended, and the government still didn't want to hear them out. The government didn't really care to and wanted to continue to proceed to carry out the cull order. It was pushed off at various times throughout the year, so that brings us to September 22nd when they show up. And that's where things got very interesting, and the tension was starting to rise. They put hay bales to usher the ostriches into a small area in order to execute them. Hay bales were lit on fire by specific protesters. People showed up from a variety of different parts of the world to protest. It's been kind of a mess in general. And as videos from the farm started circulating online, voices started raising louder and louder that this cannot be allowed to continue. In terms for me, even just from you can talk from an animal rights perspective, sure, but as well from a farmer's perspective, it costs a lot of money to, have 400 ostriches and to have them just killed for the sake of an order that was ordered a year ago, and how the facts of the case have now changed, and the fact the government doesn't want to change their stance on it is really concerning, considering all the money you could be out if this were to happen. And the fact the government's just like, yeah, we're just going to do it. And the only reason why these stays keep happening over and over and over again is just because of all the social media hoopla over it. If it wasn't for you and for social media speaking out about it, this would have been carried out a long time ago. This was kind of the last hoorah, a video that was posted by DC Media of what was happening on location.
Out there suffering, so I'd like to try and discuss a few.
An Indian tribe just said that this is unceded territory and these birds are not to be touched. Wow. Share that around, folks. Just post that an Indian band has declared this unceded territory and the birds are not to be touched. Spread the word.
So as tensions are rising and a lot of different personalities are on site here, an indigenous group showed up and says, you know what, this is unceded territory and you are to not touch the birds. And that's when you see the government officials start backing off. And then this announcement comes through, where the Supreme Court of Canada offers another stay. It is hereby ordered that the motion for a stay of proceedings is referred to the court under Rule 5, Section 2D of the Rules of the Supreme Court of Canada, and the application for leave to appeal will be dealt with in an expedited basis. An interim stay of enforcement of the notice to dispose dated December 31st, 2024 is granted pending the decision on this motion and the application for leave to appeal. The respondent shall maintain custody of the birds that are subject to the notice to dispose, and the applicant shall not interfere with the respondent's custody of the birds pending the decision on this motion and the application for leave of appeal. And that's where we are currently at. All this chaos happening on site, people speaking out, making noise, being loud about it, has allowed these ostriches to survive another day. And here's the thing that I hear a lot from people at this point is, why? Why are we even talking about this? Why is this news? What's going on? Well, we went through the timeline. The government, in this case, refuses to acknowledge the facts of the case. They just want to carry this whole thing out. And so it's so much more of it's more so emblematic of government overreach that we've experienced time and time and time again over the past 10 years in this country. And it needs to stop. And so if they want to go after the ostriches, well, the ostriches are now going to be a symbol of fighting against government overreach in this country. And this is just another example of it. Some people think, hey, it's stupid. What are we even doing here? Why are we even talking about this? It's just a farm in BC. I think that's the issue, is the fact that the government doesn't want to listen to facts, doesn't want to listen to the case, just wants to carry out what they want to carry out and leave these farmers out, and as well as killing 400 ostriches without it really being necessary at this point, at least from what we see from the case. That is why we're talking about this, and that's why I believe this is a win to continue to push back on the overreaching of this government. And I'll leave it at that, because we have another story that's come forward. The Nova Scotia Liberals to table bill that would ban use of social media by children under 16. We cannot ignore the impacts of social media on youth mental health, says Liberal House Leader Ian Rankin. The provincial Liberals plan to introduce legislation this fall that would ban children under 16 in Nova Scotia from using social media platforms. Liberal House Leader Ian Rankin said the bill would make Nova Scotia the first province to set minimum age restrictions for social media access and could set a precedent for other provinces to follow suit. Rankin, who announced the proposed bill at Province House on Wednesday morning, told reporters social media algorithms expose children to harmful content that could affect their physical and mental health. It became very clear to me as parents and legislators that we cannot ignore the impacts of social media on youth mental health, said Rankin, the MLA for Timberlea Prospect. If passed, the legislation would hold social media platforms responsible for enforcement. If they fail to comply, they could be fined up to $250,000 a day. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because it is very interesting kind of seeing this being brought forward. Again, the Liberals have a handful of seats in the Nova Scotia legislature. The Conservatives have a supermajority. So this isn't going anywhere. However, it's something to call attention to, considering Bill C-63 is looking to be resurfaced at the federal level, which is the online harms bill. And they follow the same logic that the Nova Scotia Liberals are following here. It's for the children. Need to ban social media use. And quite frankly, I'll be honest, I agree. Teens and kids really shouldn't be on social media. It shouldn't. It's a problem. It is a problem on our society right now. It's affecting their mental health. It's affecting their well-being, and we're not seeing a lot of positive outcomes from it. However, legislating it as law is a terrible, terrible precedent, because they legislate this. Then what are they going to legislate next of what you can do on the internet? Questions people have is like, okay, then how do you enforce this? Some people are just like, oh, okay, they'll see a portal where you have to give your age, and everyone lies about that. But no. That's not what would happen, though. It would get to the point, because there are multiple services that do this now. You would have to provide ID that proves your date of birth, proves who you are, and you would have to submit that to the social media company, and they would decide if they can allow you to access the platform or not. That's how this was going to go. Say it does go through, and if they're going to put the onus on the social media companies to have to collect this data, which is a whole other issue, brings a whole host of problems in general, because they haven't been great at securing our personal information over the years. So that's one issue. But number two, you are forcing these social media companies now to institute infrastructure to collect this data, house the data, which are all capital costs for them. And if they don't do that, then they're going to be charged $250,000 a day until they do such a things to make sure they limit the access of social media to minors. What we've seen when legislation like that comes down the pipe, we've seen what happens. We saw what Meta has done and how they've responded. They said, oh, you want us to pay to show news on our platform? Well, guess what? We just won't do that. And we won't allow news to be shown on our platform. That's how social media platforms are going to respond to this. We're just not going to service your area, Nova Scotia. We're just not going to service your area, Canada. And if we do, it will be a light version of our social media platform where things are curated, censored, and go through a specific filter before they get to their users. And we've heard of countries doing that before, and we know who they are. Is that the precedent you really want to set? And that's why I was concerned I wanted to bring this up, because it starts here with a insignificant Liberal base inside the House right now in the Nova Scotia legislature. However, this is all going to the top, and they are going to be thinking of bringing stuff like this forward, where online harms bill, we need to limit what is being seen on social media. We're going to limit what is allowed to be on social media. Do we start having people prove their identity before they use social media? It's all more parental control over how you use the internet, and they will always usher it in under the guise of helping the children, rather than putting the onus on parents and the family unit to take care of business themselves. But guess what? What have they done for the past 10 years? Completely kibosh and destroy the family unit in Canada so that they, the government, can be your daddy. But anyways, enjoy your day. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.